For this video, we're going to identify the arteries to our brain and arteries to the spinal cord as well, if they are present. There are four blood vessels that mainly deliver blood to the brain inside the cranium. Two of them, the internal carotid arteries, right and the left, they supply mostly the anterior parts of the brain, and we have the vertebral arteries back here, supplying mainly the brain stem, found in the posterior cranial fossa. So those are the main arterial feeders. There will be arteries that will connect the posterior feeders to the anterior feeders, as well as arterial connection between the right side and the left side. So the anterior, posterior, right, left connection basically will form what we call the circle of Willis here in the brain, of the brain. So let's try to identify the other parts of the circle of Willis and the branches supplying the different structures here in the brain. So maybe we can start with the vertebral arteries down here. So vertebral artery supplying structures in the posterior cranial fossa, including the brain stem and the cerebellum. We have here a branch coming from the vertebral artery. It's already the branch is already cut, but when this was during the time when this was harvested, before the removal of the arachnoid membrane or the arachnoid layer of the meninges, that is actually the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. It goes to the cerebellum, lower and posterior part of the cerebellum. Posterior inferior cerebellar artery, or PICA. But in your exam, you should write the full, or type the full name of the artery. So right and left vertebral artery will form this large artery running anterior to the mid line of the pons. From the basilar artery will arise this arterial branch. One is preserved here on the right side. So what artery is this? This is the anterior inferior cerebellar artery, AICA or ICA. PICA, ICA. So it supplies the cerebellum, anterior and inferior part. So you can see here there will be small branches coming from the basilar artery supplying the pons. That will be the Pontine arteries or the Pontine branches. And right here, up here, we have branches Actually, there's an anatomical variation that we can observe here, no? So these two branches to the right and another two branches to the left, no? That will be the superior cerebellar arteries, no? Superior cerebellar. Now I guess this artery is not superior cerebellar, no? But it's duplicated posterior cerebral artery. But here on the other side, these two branches, no, they supply the superior part of the cerebellum, no, which unfortunately is missing, no, from this particular specimen. But you can see, no, you can see the arteries, no, they are going to this area right here below the tentorium cerebelli. So those two should be our superior cerebellar arteries, no? On the other side, no, this one, not that one, this one, we can trace, no, it's going towards the cerebellum, superior aspect of the cerebellum. But this one, it will ascend, no, going towards the occipital lobe of the cerebral cortex. So that is posterior cerebral artery. So this is the main posterior cerebral artery, supposedly, no? But we have an anatomic variation. You have a small branch, no? So posterior cerebral artery on the other side. Now this artery right here, you can see coming from posterior cerebral, connected to the internal carotid, no? That is called the posterior communicating artery. Posterior communicating artery, no? And then this large branch of the internal carotid, that's the middle cerebral artery, no? Part of the cortex, no? Part of the temporal and frontal lobe of the cortex has been removed from this specimen, so you can see where the artery goes, no? And its branches deep to the cortical structure. So also a branch coming from the internal carotid, no, going towards the area of the longitudinal fissure of the brain here, no? We have the anterior cerebral artery, anterior cerebral, no? You can see its small branches going to the cortical structure of the frontal lobe, anterior cerebral. So you have one on the right, another one on the left, and there's a short artery that joins the two, that is known as the anterior communicating artery. So it connects the right side to the left side. Basilar artery down here also connects right side to the left side, while the posterior communicating artery connects the anterior, you know, circulation to the posterior circulation.